Hey there, everybody. It's Earth Day, so I have a special Earth Day edition of Mr. Ben's Afternoon Book Club, and we will be reading River today by Elisha Cooper. And this reminds me of another story called Paddle to the Sea, which I would definitely recommend you check out, and that's about a similar journey along through the Great Lakes and along the St. Lawrence Seaway and out to sea. This one is about a canoe adventure from the Adirondacks to all the way to the Atlantic Ocean down the Hudson River there. Also, thanks to Westport Library for allowing me to borrow this book. I borrowed it right before we went into quarantine, so um, we. I'm just now getting to read it, which I'm really excited about. But I thought it would be a good one for Earth Day with some local interests too. So here we go. This is River by Elisha Cooper. It just came out last year, actually, too. I just noticed. Morning, a mountain lake, a traveler, a canoe. As she paddles out into the blustery middle of the lake, she turns for a last wave to the shore behind her. Her journey begins. That's probably somewhere in the Adirondacks. It might tell me, actually, that would be good to know. Henderson Lake, perhaps, in the Adirondacks. There's a map here showing where they're starting from. She's alone, far from home. Gray clouds bump into the mountains above her. A hard wind blows through the treetops. 300 miles stretch in front of her. A faraway destination, a wild plan, and the question, can she do this? She takes a deep breath and pulls her paddle through the cold water. The canoe cuts across the lake to the headwaters of the river. Okay. Switch sides here for you. She enters the river. Cedar trees touch overhead, making a green tunnel. The river is shallow here, scraping the canoe's underside. She reaches into the water for a pebble and places it in her canoe. Also in her canoe, tent, sleeping bag, guidebook, map, life jacket, first aid kit, waterproof duffel with food, clothes, water bottles, coffee pot, stove, lamp, book, pencils, and a sketchbook. Sometimes the river is so shallow that she has to get out and walk, pulling the canoe with a rope like she's leading a horse. And then the water deepens past mossy brown rocks. As she approaches one rock, the rock rises out of the river, water rippling off its back. And that is, of course, a moose. The moose watches her, and she watches the moose. The forest is silent, but for the thump of her heart and the flit-flit of the moose's ears, she floats past, keeps paddling, and around the next bend she hears thunder. The thunder grows louder, and the river rushes into a gorge, stone shelves squeezing the river tight, pushing the canoe faster and faster until the thunder is on top of them. Rapids. She braces her knees against the canoe's ribs and cinches her life jacket. The river turns white and roars, drops, jumps, leaps from pool to pool, bashes the canoe against underwater boulders. She digs her paddle into the spray. Her hat flies off. Gone. Her stomach flips, and for a moment she fears the rapids will flip them over, but the canoe rights itself, and the river spits them out down into the next rapids below. When the thunder fades with a sigh, she comes to shore. After checking to make sure the canoe is okay, she changes into long underwear and warm socks. Hangs her bedraggled clothes to dry, she sets up her tent, heats a bowl of soup, and eats peanut butter straight from the jar, using a chocolate bar as a spoon. Hands blistered, body sore, she writes in her sketchbook by the glow of the lamp. Above her, stars come out in the blue-black sky. The moon climbs up among the stars. She is alone, but not. The river stays beside her, mumbling to her and to itself all through the night. Dawn comes early, cold and sharp. She brews coffee, then breaks camp and heads downriver, sliding under an iron bridge. Rusted pickup trucks rattle above her. A driver waves, she waves back. The river winds through the forest. New life appears around each bend. Otters, ducks, dragonflies, a kingfisher. As she sketches, she wonders what word would best describe each animal. Eager otter? She sees a blackberry bush, so she comes to shore and is picking berries when she hears rustling. A bear cub. She stops, backs away real slow, floats off in the canoe. When she camps, she plucks a flower and presses it between pages in her sketchbook. She eats cheese and crackers. A full day, she thinks. In the morning, she paddles until she comes to a stone bridge and a sign that says, danger. A dam. The river stops. She must portage around the dam. She takes 2 trips, first with her gear, then with the canoe. She staggers, the canoe balancing on her shoulders, down the steep gravel path next to the dam. She trips, drops the canoe. Grimacing, she checks the canoe in her bloodied knee, and then loads up and keeps paddling. Whoops, wrong side. There you go. Creeks feed the river, and the river widens. Cows graze in pastures at the river's side, raising their heads to watch her go. She moos at the cows, and one moos back. The land hums with tractors, and the air smells of cut hay. Black flies circle her head and bite her ankles. In the evening, she swims in the river and washes the day away, treats her bruised knee, falls asleep fast. The next morning, she paddles downriver until she's stopped again. A waterfall. There's no way around it, or there's no way over the waterfall, but there is a way around it. A lock. Locks descend the river here like a staircase, allowing boats to navigate up or down the river. Fishing boats and work boats wait to enter the lock. She paddles into line. The brawny man operating the lock bellows, "Hello." The operator turns a lever in his control shanty. The top gate of the lock groans open. She slides into the chamber. The operator turns another lever. Water drains out of the chamber. As the water level lowers, she holds a rope to steady the canoe, and then the far gate opens. The operator bellows goodbye, and she is loosed downriver, onward. There she goes. The sun hammers down and she paddles the flattened river. Sweat beads the back of her neck. The country shifts from farms with faded barns to villages with white clapboard houses, to chimneyed factories on the outskirts of town. At the levee, she hauls up the canoe. 2 boys with fishing rods watch from above. "Where are you going?" asks the older boy. The younger boy stares wide-eyed when she tells them. It feels funny to talk. She asks them to look after her canoe and walks the streets of the old town. It feels funny to walk. At a grocery, she buys snacks, supplies, postcards, and a hat. And at the levee, she gives the boys the snacks, and the boys wish her luck. Back in the canoe, the river feels familiar beneath her. She paddles away from town and camps that night on an island, alone again. "Where is the river? It was here last night." The river has been taken away by fog, thick and wet, so she reads in her tent and explores the island. High in the branches of a tree, she sees a brambled nest, and down on the rocky shore, an eagle with a fish in its talons. A striped bass, maybe a sturgeon? She opens her guidebook, and then her sketchbook. All is quiet but for the shh of pencil on paper. There's nothing in the world but her, the bird, this place. No one knows where she is. And then the eagle takes flight, its wings thumping in the air, and the morning lifts the fog away. And she points the nose of the canoe downriver. Clouds roll over mountains, and the river runs through the mountains between earth and sun. The river is broad here. She hugs the shore. The land passes by mile after mile as she guides the canoe south past apple orchards, hilltop houses, and industrial plants. She paddles the days and camps in the evenings. Her blisters have hardened into calluses, her sunburn turned dark. Pencils whittled down, sketchbook filling up. The days blend together. Paddling, sketching, eating, camping, paddling again. At night, when she sleeps, she dreams she's paddling under a big cloud sky. The river snakes through craggy hills. Rock faces loom above her and plunge down into deep water. She paddles with eyes narrowed on the lookout. Under a shadowy bridge around bell-ringing buoys next to railway tracks and a clattering freight train. When the current is too swift or the wind too strong, she comes to shore and waits, writes postcards, checks her map. Once the conditions turn, she keeps going and is paddling around a stony promontory when she senses a rumbling coming from the other side, and it's heading right at her. A tugboat barreling upriver, plowing up a wake of water. She hollers, nobody on board sees her. But she acts fast, turning the canoe's bow into the wake, even as water crashes over the gunwale. That was close, she thinks. She lands, hides the canoe among a pile of rocks, walks up the main street of a village, mails her postcards, and buys a cookie at a packed bakery. Then back to the river. As she heads out, she feels a drop of rain. And then another. A smattering of raindrops, and then a drum roll, and then a single sheet blowing sideways, a squall, swallowing her and the canoe and pushing them toward cliffs on the opposite shore before capsizing them, dumping her into the raging water. She holds tight to the overturned canoe and, teeth clenched, legs kicking, drags it to a rocky beach. Shivering, she takes stock. Tent gone, clothes soaked, sketchbook safe. She huddles under a roof of trees as lightning dances above her. Night falls. She sleeps little. No one knows where she is. Dawn comes at last. She stretches at the water's edge and finds a piece of driftwood shaped like a fish. As she paddles downriver, her body warms. Then she rounds a bluff, and there's a steel suspension bridge with arcing cables, and on the other side of the bridge, the city. She slips into the city unseen, almost unseen. A lone gull hovers above the bow of the canoe, riding the wind and watching her over its shoulder, before catching a gust and rising up, up, up into the air, higher and higher, until the canoe is a small dark dot on the gray-blue river, one moving part in the wide world below. Glass mountains of skyscrapers, brick forests of buildings, gorges of streets leading down to the river and crisscrossing the river, boats, scudding ferries, tacking sailboats, dueling jet skis, speeding police boats, fireboats, tour boats, tugboats, shoving barges. She paddles the length of the city and listens. Growl of traffic, blare of horns, rattle of subway cars over a bridge, a chorus. The sounds bounce off the buildings and over ship masts and down to her. The city, old and new. She feels like an explorer, but there is someone here she knows, someone she needs to see. She paddles through the harbor to the boatyard. Black-hulled boats and brick warehouses crowd the wharves. The air smells of diesel fuel and dirt. Standing in front of one warehouse, beaming out at her, is a bearded man in overalls, the builder of her canoe. "How did she do?" he calls down, nodding at his handiwork. They haul the canoe to the wharf and run their hands down its sides. They share a coffee. The builder gives her a small wrapped package, and then she launches the canoe one more time past cranes lifting and lowering freight out across the harbor. Through the harbor and under a last bridge, the river stretches behind her. In front, the ocean. A hard wind blows and white clouds race overhead. The ocean is big and wild, but she is strong and she knows what she's doing. She reads the weather and keeps the canoe steady, and over the water she makes her way. As she nears the end of her journey, she looks to the horizon and imagines the rest of the world, and a part of her wants to keep going. Another adventure, another day. But closer in, she sees the lighthouse, and she knows it's time for her to be home. A seal pops its head out of the water and watches her go. Whales must be around here too, and there's the lighthouse rising and falling in the evening light, growing larger by the minute. As she paddles, her mind plays forward. She can't wait to be with them again. Can't wait to tell them about moose and eagles, rapids and storms, and then to turn her sketches into paintings and her words into a story. Now she sees them, her family, her children waving, her dog racing down the sand. So she paddles harder, as hard as she can, and brings the canoe to shore. That is the end of the journey. The author's note says, I did not canoe down the Hudson River. I am not a capable enough canoer or a brave enough one, especially that last stretch where New York Harbor merges into the Atlantic Ocean with its treacherous currents and tides and boat traffic. But an experienced traveler could make this trip. A few have. It would take considerable planning, stamina, and heart in about 20 days. To research this book, I drove alongside the Hudson, overnight trips into the Adirondacks to explore the river's upper reaches, day trips from New York City, during which I crossed countless bridges in search of the right view, to feel water beneath me. I kayaked down the Battenkill River in upstate New York, a sketchbook on my lap, and I paddled around a lake in northern Maine in a Rangeley Lakes boat, wood-ribbed, black-sided, red-striped. Belonged to my grandfather, and now it belongs to me. And then there is a nice note on the Hudson River, which I would like to read to you. It was called Cahohatatea, the river, by the Iroquois who canoed it. North River, by the Dutch who sailed it, and finally the Hudson River for Henry Hudson, the English explorer who navigated up the river in 1609. He failed in his search for a northwest passage, but succeeded in having a great river named after him. The Hudson begins in the wilderness of Adirondack Park and ends 315 miles later in the harbor of New York City. The river's source is tiny Lake Tier of the Clouds. It becomes navigable in the clear blue waters of Henderson Lake, where our traveler starts her journey. The Adirondack Park is huge, almost 6 million acres of mountain peaks and sweeping forests, the perfect habitat to black bears, waterfowl, deer, and moose. Winslow Homer, the 19th century artist, painted beautiful watercolors of the Adirondacks' wildlife. Its abundant lakes, bogs, wetlands, and streams feed into the Hudson as it winds its way south. And then the river turns east, entering the Hudson Gorge in a stretch of difficult rapids. After passing under a red bridge in the town of Riparius, the river bends back through the mill towns of Glen Falls and Hudson Falls. Dams force travelers to carry or portage their canoes. Locks allow boaters to get around waterfalls like the ones that would have stopped Henry Hudson. Locks also link the river north to Lake Champlain in Canada and west to the Great Lakes by way of the Erie Canal. The Erie Canal, completed in 1825, connected the middle of the country to New York. America expanded and more change followed. Railroads, industry, pollution. Companies dumped their waste in the river, decimating its population of sturgeon, striped bass, and shad. Pete Seeger, the singer and activist, spurred a movement for clean water laws. In recent years, the river has begun to return to health. Eagles now nest alongside the Hudson. After the town of Troy, the river becomes tidal. The tides of the Atlantic push north into the river against its flow. Mohicans called it Mahicantuck, the river that flows both ways. The Catskill Mountains rise to the west. The dramatic landscape inspired the Hudson River School, a 19th century group of artists. Their paintings of the valley were thought to be overly romantic. Maybe they were just accurate. One painter, Frederick Church, built his home overlooking the river because of the view. After running straight south, the Hudson twists around Storm King and Bear Mountain. The mountains here look to me like Scylla and Charybdis, the mythic monsters from the Odyssey that threaten to destroy boats that pass between them. Any story of a long trip home by boat owes something to Homer's Odyssey. Forts built during the Revolutionary War took advantage of this forbidding topography. A chain was even strung across the river to stop British boats. The Hudson was strategically important. Whoever controlled the river controlled the country. Benedict Arnold fled across it. George Washington, after losing the Battle of Brooklyn, crossed the river with his army near where the George Washington Bridge now stands, retreating to fight another day. As the Hudson enters New York Harbor, it passes the island of Manhattan, Mannahatta, or the island of many hills, to the Lenape. Imagine this island as it once was. Wild and forested, its waters teeming with shorebirds, fish, oysters, and whales. A perfect port, deep and protected. The early Dutch recognized this, settling on the island's southern tip, and then the English took over, and the town grew into a port bristling with masts, then smokestacks, then skyscrapers. Across from Manhattan, the Brooklyn Navy Yard built battleships for World War II, and today it is home to artisans like those who could have built our traveler's canoe. Container ships now head out from New York Harbor under the Verrazano Bridge to distant ports, passing the lighthouse at Sandy Hook, the oldest standing lighthouse in the United States, where our traveler ends her journey. Think of the great cities of the world. Chances are they're on an ocean or a river. London, Shanghai, New York. Humans are bound to water, our history tied to exploration, trade, and boats. We navigate between the countryside and the city, and then to other countries. We are connected by water, more connected to each other than we know. Sometimes, when I'm feeling low or uninspired, I go down to the Hudson, near where I live in Manhattan, and I look at the river flow past. I imagine how the water I'm looking at was once in a clear blue lake upstate, and maybe someone there is looking at the water too, and knowing this fills me with wonder. Very good. So that was River by Elisha Cooper. I hope you enjoyed that. I definitely enjoyed that. It was a fun adventure. I hope it inspires you, maybe not to take a canoe down the Hudson, unless you know what you're doing, but to adventure and to explore. So thank you for joining me, and we'll see you soon with another book. And I hope you have a great afternoon. Happy Earth Day, and see you later.